Good afternoon and welcome to another episode on Fem Talk 89 FM with the theme Analysis and Advocating for Gender Responsive Climate Policies in Fiji for the LGBTIQ+ community, persons living with disabilities, rural women leaders, and young women in Fiji. On the panel, there are panelists and leaders as well from the diverse group communities in Fiji. Representing the different communities. And panelists, please share a little bit about yourself and the different groups that you affiliate yourself with.
Thank you. My name is 𝗚𝗲𝘆𝑇𝗶𝘆𝑇𝗶 and I'm the field coordinator for Strumphet Alliance Network. I'm also affiliated to TAAG and also 𝗔𝗲𝘆𝘆𝘆𝘆𝘆𝑇𝗶𝘆𝑇𝗶 Naka.
Bulabinaka, everyone. My name is Rhonda, and I'm, of course, representing the Trans Affirmative Action Guild. I'm the Executive Director for the Trans Affirmative Action Guild, and, of course, affiliated with many other organizations that are here, so thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Bulabinaka, I'm Francis Qounadovu. I work with femLINK as their central convener, looking after the Lami district and the Nosori district. Also, one maritime island of the island of 𝗔𝗶𝘆𝘆𝑇𝗶. And my work is mainly working with rural women in the communities, addressing the issues that they face in the communities, and documenting their stories.
Thank you, ladies. Just to continue with our conversation this afternoon, how does climate change impact your community differently?
I would say, actually there is an alarming evidence that climate change both directly and indirectly impacts our sexual health and also including the increased gender-based violence on disruptions in sexual and reproductive services because of extreme weather.
Thank you, 𝗚𝗲. From the perspective, from the you have mentioned that you work closely with the Trans Affirmative Alliance. How does the impact of climate change affects you personally, and from the different environment, geographical locations that you are situated in?
I actually I live here in Suva, in Lami. One climate change impact that we're actually facing right now is the water cuts. This never used to happen before, and it is actually happening now. The reason being is the high level of water in the dams that has burst, and it has caused damages to the piping lanes, and this has caused cuts in water that comes down towards the Lami area. We never used to have this 10-12 years back, but now we have water cuts every now and then.
Thank you, Rhonda. What specific changes do you face due to climate change, and how are these challenges compounded to your identity?
Thank you. So, talking about challenges, it's a sensitive topic, especially when you're marginalized due to your choice of expression, gender expression, etc. We already know women face a lot of challenges in accessing multiple things. So it's much more compounded now when we have to be responding and navigating the environment as a gender diverse person. So it's multifaceted. But to start, I've listed a few here. So the most important thing for us at the Trans Affirmative Action Guild is our cultural displacement due to our identity, and how we've been pushed out of societies, communal societies, because of the identity that we have adopted. And we're trying to socialize people back in. Now, how climate change has affected that is obviously in rising sea levels, and of course the onslaught of hurricanes and tropical cyclones that we are so used to here in the Pacific limits and probably strains our livelihoods even further, especially when it comes to accessing those natural resources. So it's the connection to the land, the waterways, the oceans, they're all communal, they're all connected to our communality and also connected to us as indigenous people, spirituality. So the effects of climate change has restrained that from us accessing. So we've got that, and then we've got the access to natural resources. Of course, we are not first priority when it comes to the access of those resources. We also have representation and advocacy. We're not necessarily people who are prioritized to be sitting at the table to have these conversations in terms of things surrounding climate change and the politics surrounding it. And then we also have things like the strain on community resilience. We as gender diverse people, as trans people, I think our community responds better to words like 𝗥𝗲𝘀𝗽𝗋. The Rotumans have a word for themselves called 𝗔𝗱𝘆𝘇𝗶, 𝗔𝗱𝗆 fine, 𝗔𝗱𝗆 hens. And then of course our indentured sisters and brothers can relate more to trans. At least that's what we hear from our communities. They have their own varied experiences, and the exposure to climate change has dictated those stories, and they are already struggling with life. What climate change does is it puts an extra strain on how we have to be resilient and to exist. So it's an unnecessary thing that we as Pacific Islanders shouldn't even be going through, because this is not something that we brought upon ourselves. Climate change was brought on us by larger nations who are bigger consumers of fossil fuels, etc., and we're having to suffer here in the Pacific because of it. So it's an uninvited, a strain that we don't welcome, because it has nothing to do with us. But yes, thank you for asking the question.
Thank you, Rhonda. Just to continue with our conversation this afternoon, Francis, would you like to add onto the priorities for climate change and how these can be addressed in a gender-responsive way?
Naka, in the past few months, femLINKpacific have conducted a number of convenings in terms of disaster resiliency, and one of the major issues that was brought up in those convenings were the climate change and climate justice, and women have raised the challenges that they have faced on the ground, and one of the challenges now, like Uha just mentioned, is this the drought. We can say that it could be technical in terms from water authority, but in most parts of the central division, it has been an ongoing thing in terms of the drought, in terms of water. Then in the 𝗏𝗏 district, they have been talking on the rising of sea level, and that has the main cause of that would be climate change. Another thing would be development that's happening around us, and in most parts of Fiji, they are also talking on the recent floodings that they have been having, especially in the interiors, also in the town areas. And we can say that some of the decisions that we are making in terms of development, in terms of the kind of investors that we bring in, that we see that are doing more harm on our environment as a whole, and we can see that it is a contributing factor to these climate change, to all these issues. And also, when we're talking about investors, we see the different kind of investors and the different materials in terms of pollution, what they bring. And we see women in these spaces have raised the health issues that have eventuated from the kind of work or the produce that these companies are producing, and even in the ways of disposing of rubbish. And during this convening, we really have talked seriously about it, and it has gone to a stage where the women are questioning on the standard of environment impact assessment that the government has in place, because before any company or anybody does anything on development, the requirement is to have an environment impact assessment. And that is another thing that we really need to question on the percentage of our waste that we can just dump just like that. And this, I believe, will be from Rewa and the Subai, the main hub. They are the ones that come into the space and say it, because I believe they are the ones who are victims of this dumping of waste. From the Lami area, we have the cement factory, we have the Superbowl Bridge there, we have the Wailanda industrial area, then no sorry, we can say the rubbish from the decisions, the developers that are inland from Upper Naitasiri that comes down the Rewa River. And so to that I would say that we should really see in terms of trying to sustain, because we can say that contributing factor, like Rhonda has said, that the larger countries, and then we have Fiji here, and the kind of investors that we bring, that's causing more harm. So when those two meet together, then it's us, the people, that are affected.
Thank you, Francis. Rhonda, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I completely agree with Francis that I guess the only thing that I wanted to add from a gender diverse community's perspective is our commitment to ecological and environmental justice. The reason why that particular aspect of our work is important is because it addresses how climate change has disproportionately affected not only women, but people of diverse genders as well, how it has affected us in terms of accessing resources, because these are important conversations to have, along with climate adaptation. Our people are trying to figure out what climate change is, because it's a new thing to us. The whole concept and idea and conversation is fairly alien. My own personal experience about going back to the village, and every time I talk about climate change with my elders, my grandmother who's on the islands, my aunties who are on the islands from Maritime Islands in Qounadovu, I'm talking from that experience. They haven't realized how much has changed with the environment about them moving internally. To them, it's just the act of God. And the environment has evolved and time has changed. They don't realize there are certain aspects about the environment that were forced on them because of the situation of climate change. And they don't know that it was perpetuated because of climate change. They just think they came about it. So it's important to talk about climate change adaptations for communities, and for maybe most of us who have who occupy stakeholder spaces here in urban areas, we need to talk about ecological justice and environmental justice, how that affects us in terms of access. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for the conversation. Coming back to you, ʻuha, how can we ensure that climate policies are inclusive and equitable for all citizens?
Ensuring participation of all stakeholders in consultations and also planning and designing. The opportunities to implement also climate actions that directly benefit the low-income, underrepresented and vulnerable communities, measure the impact of the inclusive climate action, and also adjust as needed. I could say that, yeah.
Thank you. What would you like to add onto the conversation on how can we ensure that climate policies are inclusive and equitable for all citizens?
Naka, I would suggest that we actively promote equality. This involves specific actions to empower women in their household and communities. The reason I would promote equality in terms of gender representation of women in national policy making is because that while doing the convenings around the central division and all, this conversation has eventuated from the women's spaces. And we see that they care, we see that they are victims. So, because if we were to compare both women and men are talking about other things, but it's the women that are talking about what the impacts that's happening. Like if they have to go fishing, they have to go further, not like before that they can just fetch it just by the sea. So in terms of, we really need to promote equality, which we need to see that women and the diverse group have a space in the decision-making table, the meaningful, informed, and effective participation of women and girls with diverse backgrounds in relevant decision-making process, and greater representation of women in decision-making leads to more climate measures. They are the ones that can tackle, they are the ones that can advocate. Even they can be the ones doing the decision, they can be the ones walking the talk.
Thank you, Rhonda. Looking at the climate policies in Fiji, is it inclusive of the needs of the LGBTIQ++ community, persons living with disabilities, rural women leaders, and young women?
So of what we have now, it would be remiss of me to say that it's not inclusive. So I credit that there has been a lot of progress in terms of the involvement of people of diverse 𝗔𝗍𝘃 in the current policies. My concern is how that is encapsulated in policy. In practice, it's a little bit alien, because and I see this across the board in nearly everything. I don't know whether that's a cultural thing for us in Fiji. I'm still trying to figure out why it seems to be a pattern across every sector of conversation we're having. We have the progressive document that exists, but when it comes down to practice, we are classic examples when we've had this conversation that some things that are important for us to know, we in this room don't know. And we are representation of that ordinary person that comes from rural communities, that representative of community movements. You are representative of exactly where the influence is supposed to be happening. So that's my concern. The translation of the policy and how it's supposed to be practiced isn't necessarily or completely understood by people on the ground. So I feel like organizations like yourself, femLINK, those of us who have membership-led movements like TAAG, Strumphet, our work is cut out for us because it seems like the responsibility to educate community is now on us and not on the state. But that's why we love what we do. But there needs to be some synchronized partnership between state and us as civil society to make sure that when they're coming up with these kind of aspirations in policy, they must work with us and invest in us to make sure that that's understood at community level. And but yes, I think the summary of that answer would be yes, it's there, but it doesn't seem to be in practice. So that basically translates to me that it's not good enough.
What are some of the most effective ways to advocate on gender responsive and climate policies in Fiji?
So when it comes to advocacy, I was having a conversation with a few of my colleagues, and it's all about reflecting historically and how movements have been. It's always good to reflect and analyze things that have been working and what hasn't been working. And what I have realized is that we need to transition from, in terms of community building and movements, is we need to come out of confrontational advocacy methods. Because we now have laws, we now have action plans, we now have policies that exist. So we no longer need to be fighting and be at loggerheads with these people in power. So there needs to be an evolution of our approach. We have, for example, I'll just put it out there. state fears civil society for a reason, because we're like the dog without a leash. We're always angry because that's the perspective that they see of us because of what's been in the past. We're angry because we're always fighting and we're always advocating confrontationally. So the evolution of that needs to change. Now we need to tell them and let them know that we're their friends. Like, thank you for capturing certain things in the policies. Thank you for Section 26 of the Human Rights Bill in the Constitution that now protects LGBT and diverse people, including women. Thank you for that. So what needs to happen now is, so as a friend and as a partner in this movement, we want to let you know that we're here to help you make sure that our people understand. We're here to let you know that these are the infringements that are happening on the ground that we need your help to do something about. This is how the police or the justice system treats us. This is what's happening in the climate spaces. We are being under-resourced, blah, blah, blah. We need to work with them and collaborate with them. I think that's the perfect word for it. We need to collaborate, and that's the strategy forward.
Thank you, Rhonda. What about you? Would you like to add more onto the conversation? How effective, the effective ways to advocate on gender-responsive climate policies?
Just adding on to what Rhonda has said, yes, it's the being inclusive of the others. You have to bring them in, and we all have to be in a room together to be inclusive.
Thank you, Francis. What are some of the key messages and demands that we should be advocating for in terms of climate policies and inclusiveness and equity?
We really need to be advocating on equal representation in leadership spaces to help build more just, diverse, and successful communities, organizations, and societies, and also tackling cultural barriers to gender equality and women's participation in the decision making. In such, there's always a misunderstanding of the concept of gender, which hinders its effective consideration and prioritization in the policies. Because I think so, and there's also a misunderstanding on that word in gender and sex. So with all this needs to be clarified. There has always been difficulties in understanding the linkages between the two. So I think so. With that being said, that we really need to take this seriously. Climate change will not wait for us. It's coming, and it is an urgent priority on. Well, it's an urgent priority globally, and for us in Fiji, we're just a small island. We're a dot on the world map, so the impacts are already being felt here. The women, the rural women in our communities have said it. We have amplified about it. We have lobbied on their behalf, but there is still work. In terms of grappling with the challenges and mitigating the causes, and especially for developing countries and vulnerable populations. Right now, in most places here in the districts that I cover, some of the communities are about to be relocated, in terms of climate. The rising of sea level, the recent flooding, and them being resilient to this. I think there needs to be a lot of awareness on the ground, and also a lot of influence on the policies, that it would be able to cater for the diverse groups, cater for the different roles that we play in the community as women leaders, and also in terms of meeting the needs of when you are being displaced. What can be done? If we look back during what was the last cyclone that went past? People are still trying to, there's a community there in Zongia. They're still living in tents. And now we're talking on climate justice. There's a lot. And I think so in the national policies, all those things need to be seen and considered priority in terms of rebuilding, in terms of relocation and all like that. It needs to be prioritized.
Thank you, Francis. Just to wrap up our conversation this afternoon, what will be your message to the viewers out there?
My message to the leaders, to our policymakers, please consider our diverse women, the rural women, those that we are all experiencing the effects of climate change. We are willing to work in partnership. We need a policy that is fair and just, that would be able to cater and meet the needs of our people. Naka.
Thank you, Bharat. Coming back to you, just to end our conversation this afternoon for the viewers out there on FemTalk 89 FM, what is your message?
I think it would be, creating inclusive policies that promote safety, health, resilience in the face of environmental challenges.
Thank you, Rhonda?
Thank you, Alex. My message to to the viewers is basically when you see somebody, get to know somebody, get to know their stories, find out who they are, so you can make an informed decision of what kind of help you need to be offering people in order to be successfully kind. Because kindness isn't lazy, it requires work. Right? In order for you to be effectively kind, you need to do some work and love each other fully. Other than that, for the stakeholders out there, it's important for them to realize that we only have one world to live in, and we're only given this one life. And for those of us who do not have the luxury of wealth, who don't have access to privilege, that message is much more painful when we know that this world that we live in is being affected. They can get to escape certain dangers of it. Vulnerable communities cannot have that luxury. So they need to step up, do what they're supposed to do. They're voted in there for a reason.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. So you've been listening to Fifita, Rhonda, and Francis Qounadovu on FemTalk 89 FM. Thank you for joining us.